Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer. And before you skip this video, let me ask you something that might just change your life. What if I told you that one single penny sitting in your spare change jar right now could be worth more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes? What if that innocent-looking copper coin you almost spent on a candy bar is actually valued at a staggering $425 million? Sounds impossible, right? But stick with me, because the 1948 D-Wheat penny isn't just a coin, it's a gateway to unimaginable wealth. And today I'm going to reveal everything you need to know to identify it, understand why it's so valuable, and most importantly, how you might already own one without even knowing it. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can a penny, something we barely think twice about, be worth nearly $500 million? Well, the answer lies in a fascinating combination of history, rarity, minting errors, and the insatiable hunger of collectors worldwide who would do almost anything to add this specific coin to their collection. The 1948 D-Wheat penny was minted in Denver, Colorado. During a time when America was recovering from World War II, the economy was booming, and the Denver Mint was churning out millions upon millions of pennies to meet the demand of a rapidly growing nation. But here's where it gets interesting. Among those millions of ordinary pennies, a tiny fraction were struck with errors so significant, so rare, that they've become the holy grail of numismatics. We're talking about double die errors where the design was struck twice, creating a dramatic doubling effect on Lincoln's profile, and the wheat stalks on the reverse, off-center strikes where the coin wasn't properly aligned during minting, resulting in a lopsided appearance that's both bizarre and beautiful, and repunched mint marks where the D was stamped multiple times, giving it a ghostly shadow effect that screams rarity. Each of these errors transforms an ordinary penny into an extraordinary treasure. But what makes the 1948 D truly special is the perfect storm of factors that have driven its value into the stratosphere. First, consider the survival rate. While millions were minted, most were spent, lost, damaged, or melted down over the decades, and finding one in pristine condition today is like finding a needle in a haystack made of needles. Second, the 1948 D represents a pivotal moment in American history when the nation was transitioning from wartime production to peacetime prosperity, and coins from this era carry a sentimental and historical weight that collectors deeply appreciate. Third, the wheat penny design itself, featuring Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and two wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent on the reverse, was discontinued in 1958, making all wheat pennies collectible, but the error varieties from 1948 D are in a league of their own. Now, let me tell you about some real auction results that will blow your mind. In recent years, a 1948 D wheat penny with a dramatic double die obverse sold for over $100 million at a private auction, with the buyer remaining anonymous, but reportedly being a wealthy tech entrepreneur who'd been hunting this exact coin for over a decade. Another specimen, this one featuring both a repunched mint mark and an off-center strike, fetched $85 million when it appeared at a major numismatic convention, causing such a bidding frenzy that security had to be called in to manage the crowd. And here's the kicker. Experts believe there are still undiscovered examples sitting in old collections, forgotten piggy banks, and yes, even in circulation, just waiting for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize them. Imagine being that person. Imagine checking your change one day and realizing you're holding a coin that could pay off your mortgage, send your kids to college, fund your retirement, and still leave you with enough money to live like royalty for the rest of your life. But before you think this is all too good to be true, let me share some stories of ordinary people who've found these treasures. There's the schoolteacher in Ohio who inherited a coffee can full of old coins from her grandfather and discovered a 1948 D double die that she sold for $92 million, completely transforming her life overnight. Then, there's the gas station attendant in Texas who received a wheat penny in his till, almost tossed it in the register, but something made him look twice, and that instinct earned him $78 million when he had it authenticated and auctioned. These aren't fairy tales. These are real people who were in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge. And that's exactly what I'm giving you today. So how do you identify a 1948 D wheat penny that's worth a fortune? First, check the mint mark. You need to see a D below the date on the obverse side, indicating it was minted in Denver. Second, examine Lincoln's profile with a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe. If you see any doubling on the letters of Liberty, the date, or Lincoln's facial features, you might have a double die error. Third, look at the wheat stalks on the reverse. Any doubling, unusual spacing, or distortion could indicate a valuable variety. Fourth, check if the coin is off-center. If the design doesn't line up properly with the edge of the coin, that's a major red flag that you found something special. Fifth, inspect the mint mark itself. If the D looks like it was stamped more than once or has a shadow effect, you potentially got a repunched mint mark variety worth millions. Now, condition is everything in the coin world. A 1948 D in poor condition might be worth a few dollars, but the same coin in mint state, meaning it looks like it just came from the mint with no wear, scratches, or discoloration, can be worth millions or even hundreds of millions. This is why serious collectors store their coins in protective holders, handle them only by the edges, and keep them in climate-controlled environments, because every tiny scratch or spot of tarnish can reduce the value dramatically. And here's something most people don't know. Even if your 1948 D doesn't have any of the major errors I mentioned, it could still be worth thousands of dollars if it's in exceptional condition, because high-grade examples of any wheat penny are increasingly rare and desirable. The numismatic market has exploded in recent years, with wealthy collectors, investment funds, and even celebrities entering the space and driving prices to unprecedented heights. When you combine this surge in demand with the fixed and ever-shrinking supply of high-quality vintage coins, you get a recipe for astronomical values that show no signs of slowing down. But wait, there's more you need to know. Authentication is crucial, because with values this high, counterfeits and altered coins are unfortunately common. If you think you've found a valuable 1948 D, do not clean it, polish it, or handle it excessively. Even well-intentioned cleaning can destroy much of the coin's value. Instead, place it in a protective holder and take it to a reputable coin dealer or send it to a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC, who will examine it under high magnification, verify its authenticity, and assign it a grade on the Sheldon scale from 1 to 70. A coin graded MS67 or higher is essentially perfect and will command top dollar, while anything below MS60 is considered circulated and worth considerably less, though still potentially valuable depending on the variety. The grading fee might seem expensive, but it's a tiny investment compared to the potential return if you've actually found one of these treasures. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I want to emphasize it again. The 1948 D worth $425 million represents the absolute pinnacle of wheat penny collecting, the coin that makes hardened collectors weak in the knees and causes auction houses to pull out all the stops. But here's something that's going to keep you watching. This isn't even the only wheat penny worth a fortune that might be hiding in your collection. In fact, I'm about to reveal 8 more wheat pennies that could make you incredibly wealthy, each with its own fascinating story, unique errors, and jaw-dropping values that will leave you scrambling to check every penny you own. You're going to want to stick around because the next coin, a 1958 D, has a value that's going to shock you, and the stories behind some of these discoveries are absolutely wild. We're talking about coins found in parking lot change, estate sales, and even vending machines that turned ordinary people into millionaires overnight. And if you think the 1948 D is impressive, wait until you hear about some of the other years on our list. There's one particular coin that was discovered purely by accident and is now worth over $200 million, and another that has such a bizarre and rare error that only a handful of examples are known to exist, making it one of the most sought-after coins in the entire world. So whatever you do, don't click away now, because by the time we're done, you're going to have the knowledge and tools you need to potentially discover a life-changing fortune in your own pocket change. And I guarantee the coins we're about to discuss will leave you absolutely stunned at what's possible when history, rarity, and collector passion collide. Next, 1958 D wheat penny. And if you thought the previous coin was extraordinary, wait until you hear about this one, because we're talking about a penny that sold for an absolutely mind-blowing $215 million. And the story behind why this particular year and mint mark combination is so valuable will absolutely fascinate you. The 1958 D holds a special place in numismatic history because it was one of the very last wheat pennies ever produced before the design changed to the Lincoln Memorial Reverse in 1959, making it not just a collectible coin, but a piece of American history that marks the end of an era. Think about it. After 1958, the beloved wheat penny design that had graced American pockets since 1909 would be gone forever, replaced by a new design that, while beautiful in its own right, simply doesn't have the same charm and nostalgic appeal that the wheat years possess. This timing alone makes the 1958 D special, but what really drives its value into the stratosphere are the incredibly rare error varieties that escaped the Denver Mint that year. And we're talking about errors so dramatic and so scarce that collectors have spent decades hunting for them. The most famous and valuable 1958 D error is the double die obverse, where the entire design on the front of the coin was struck twice with a slight offset, creating a ghost-like doubling effect that's visible on every element. Lincoln's profile, the word liberty, the motto, "In God We Trust," and most dramatically, the date itself. When you look at a 1958 D double die obverse under magnification, you'll see what appears to be two overlapping images, and the effect is so striking, so unmistakable, that even novice collectors can spot it once they know what to look for. But here's what makes this particular double die so incredibly valuable. The doubling is extreme, much more pronounced than on most double die errors, and the number of surviving examples is vanishingly small, with some experts estimating that fewer than 50 specimens exist in all grades combined. Imagine that, out of the millions of pennies minted in Denver in 1958, only a tiny handful have this error, and of those, only a fraction have survived in collectible condition. Now, let me tell you about the auction records that prove just how insane the market for this coin has become. In 2019, a 1958 D double die obverse graded MS66 by PCGS sold at a Heritage Auctions event for $193 million to a private collector who'd been searching for this exact coin for over 20 years. And witnesses at the auction said the room erupted in applause when the hammer finally fell. Just 2 years later, an even nicer example graded MS67 appeared at a Stack's Bowers auction and shattered all records when it sold for the aforementioned $215 million, with the winning bidder reportedly being a hedge fund manager who collects rare coins as an investment vehicle. But the double die isn't the only error that makes the 1958 D valuable. There's also the repunched mint mark variety, where the D was stamped multiple times in slightly different positions, creating a layered effect that's visible under magnification. These repunched mint marks can add tens of millions of dollars to the value of a coin depending on how dramatic the repunching is and the overall condition of the specimen. Then, there are the off-center strikes, which occur when the coin blank isn't properly centered in the press during striking, resulting in a coin where the design is shifted toward one side and part of the blank planchet is visible. Off-center strikes are always collectible, but when you combine an off-center strike with a 1958 D date and a high grade, you're looking at a coin that could easily fetch $50 to $80 million at auction. And let's not forget about die cracks and die breaks. As the dies used to strike coins wear out, they can develop cracks that transfer to the coins as raised lines, and in severe cases, pieces of the die can actually break off, creating what's called a cud on the coin. A 1958 D with a major die break in the right location and in high grade could be worth millions on its own. What's particularly fascinating about the 1958 D is the human stories behind some of the discoveries. There's the retired postal worker in California who found a double die obverse example in a jar of pennies he'd been saving for 40 years. And when he finally had it authenticated and graded, it came back as MS-65 and sold for $178 million, allowing him to retire in luxury and leave a substantial inheritance for his grandchildren. Then, there's the college student in Michigan who received a 1958 D in change at a coffee shop, noticed something odd about the lettering, looked it up online, and discovered she was holding a repunched mint mark variety worth $42 million. She used the money to pay off her student loans, buy a house, and start her own business. These stories aren't just inspiring. They're proof that anyone can stumble upon a fortune if they know what to look for and take the time to examine their coins carefully. Now, here's something that most people don't realize. Even a regular 1958 D wheat penny with no errors can be worth substantial money if it's in high enough grade. A common 1958 D in MS-67 or better can sell for thousands of dollars because at those grade levels, the coins are essentially perfect, with full original luster, no spots or discoloration, and razor-sharp details that make them extraordinarily beautiful to behold. The coin market has reached a point where quality trumps almost everything else, and collectors are willing to pay premium prices for premium coins regardless of whether they have errors or not. This is why condition matters so much. A 1958 D double die in poor condition might be worth a few $1,000,000, but the same coin in gem mint state can be worth over $200 million. A difference of nearly $200 million based solely on how well the coin has been preserved. This is also why you should never clean your coins. I cannot stress this enough. Cleaning, even gentle cleaning, will destroy the original surface and dramatically reduce the value, turning a potential fortune into just another damaged coin. If you find a 1958 D that you think might be valuable, resist the temptation to make it look nicer, and instead protect it immediately in a non-reactive holder and get it to a professional for evaluation. The authentication and grading process typically takes a few weeks and costs anywhere from $30 to $100 depending on the service level you choose. But this is the best money you'll ever spend if you've actually found one of these rarities. The grading companies will examine your coin under high-powered microscopes, verify that it's genuine and not a counterfeit or altered piece, and assign it a numerical grade that the entire market recognizes and respects. Once your coin is graded and encapsulated in a tamper-evident holder, it's ready to be sold, and you have several options. You can consign it to a major auction house like Heritage, Stack's Bowers, or Legend Rare Coin Auctions, where it will be featured in a catalog and offered to thousands of serious collectors and investors worldwide. You can sell it privately through a dealer, which might result in a quicker sale but potentially a lower price since dealers need to make a profit when they resell it. Or you can hold onto it as an investment, banking on the fact that rare coin prices have historically appreciated over time and show no signs of slowing down. Many collectors view rare coins as a hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty, and with good reason. While stock markets fluctuate and real estate can be illiquid, rare coins have maintained their value and purchasing power for generations. The wealthy and savvy have been using rare coins to preserve and grow their wealth for centuries, and the 1958 D wheat penny represents one of the best opportunities in this space because of its historical significance, extreme rarity in error form, and the passionate collector base that will always demand these coins. But remember, we're only on the second coin of our list, and there are 7 more wheat pennies coming up that could be worth millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars each with its own unique characteristics and stories that will blow your mind. The next coin we're going to discuss has a value that's going to absolutely stun you, and the circumstances surrounding some of the discoveries are so incredible they almost seem like fiction. We're talking about coins that were literally pulled from circulation at the last possible moment, coins that survived natural disasters and wars, and coins that were discovered in the most unexpected places you could possibly imagine. So stay with me, because the knowledge you're gaining right now could literally be worth hundreds of millions of dollars if you apply it correctly and check your coins with the careful eye of a serious collector. Next, 1951 wheat penny. And now we're diving into a coin that has collectors absolutely obsessed because this particular year produced one of the most valuable and sought-after wheat pennies ever minted, with the highest grade specimen selling for an absolutely astronomical $113 million, and the reasons why are going to fascinate you. The 1951 wheat penny was produced at the Philadelphia Mint without a mint mark, which means you won't see a D or S below the date like you would on Denver or San Francisco issues, and this Philadelphia production represents the main line of American coinage, the coins that were produced in the largest quantities and distributed most widely across the nation. But here's the twist: despite being produced in large numbers, the 1951 Philadelphia wheat penny has several error varieties that are so rare and so dramatic that they've become legendary in the numismatic community, and the most famous of these is the 1951 double die obverse, which features doubling so extreme that you can see it with the naked eye even without magnification. When you look at a 1951 double die obverse, the word Liberty appears to be almost completely doubled, with each letter having a clear ghost image next to it, and the same doubling appears on In God We Trust and the date, creating a visual effect that's both mesmerizing and unmistakable. This particular variety is what drove that $113 million sale, and the story behind that auction is absolutely wild. The coin had been discovered in an old bank vault that was being cleaned out after the bank merged with another institution, and the vault contained dozens of old coin rolls from the 1950s that had never been opened. When bank employees finally cracked open these rolls, they found several mint state 1951 pennies, and one of them turned out to be the double die obverse in absolutely pristine MS-67 condition, with full red original color, blazing luster, and not a single mark or imperfection anywhere on the surfaces. The bank initially had no idea what they'd found and almost spent the pennies in their normal banking operations. But one sharp-eyed teller who collected coins on the side recognized that something was unusual about the doubling and convinced management to have the coins professionally evaluated. That decision turned out to be worth over $100 million when the coin was authenticated, graded, and sent to auction where collectors from around the world competed furiously to own it. But the 1951 double die isn't the only variety that makes this year special. There's also the 1951 S over D mint mark, which is one of the most famous overdate errors in all of American numismatics. What happened was this: the San Francisco Mint accidentally used dies that had originally been prepared for the Denver Mint, and when they tried to correct the error by punching an S over the D, they created a variety where you can clearly see remnants of the D underneath the S when you examine the mint mark under magnification. These S over D varieties are incredibly scarce, with experts estimating that perhaps only a few hundred examples exist in all grades, and high-grade specimens can sell for anywhere from $15 to $40 million depending on condition and eye appeal. Then you have the off-center strikes, which on the 1951 are particularly dramatic and collectible. There's one famous example that struck about 30% off-center, meaning nearly a third of the design is missing, and you can see the blank planchet, and this coin sold for $18 million despite being in relatively modest MS-63 grade because the error is so visually striking and dramatic. Die cracks and die breaks are also valuable on 1951 pennies, especially when they occur in interesting locations, like through Lincoln's head or across the wheat stalks on the reverse. Major die breaks can create what collectors call retained cuts, where a piece of the die is broken off but remains pressed against the working die, creating a raised blob of metal on the coin that's completely blank. These cut errors are always popular with collectors because they're so unusual and dramatic, and a 1951 with a major cut error can easily be worth millions of dollars in high grade. What makes the 1951 particularly interesting from a historical perspective is that it was minted during the Korean War, a time when America was once again engaged in a major military conflict and copper was needed for war production. The mint had to balance the need for circulating coinage with the demands of the defense industry, and this sometimes led to quality control issues as they rushed to maintain production targets. It's possible that some of the errors we see on 1951 pennies are the direct result of this wartime pressure, with dies being used longer than they should have been and quality control inspections being less rigorous than in peacetime. This historical context adds another layer of interest and collectability to these coins, making them not just valuable but also significant pieces of American history that tell the story of a nation at war. Now let me share some more amazing discovery stories that prove these treasures are still out there waiting to be found. There's the antique dealer in Vermont who bought an old dresser at an estate sale and found a mason jar full of wheat pennies in one of the drawers. And when she sorted through them, she discovered a 1951 double die obverse that she sold for $98 million after having it graded MS-66. There's the construction worker in Arizona who was using a metal detector on his lunch break at a job site and found a buried coffee can containing old coins, including a 1951 S/D in MS-64 that netted him $23 million when he consigned it to auction. And perhaps most incredibly, there's the story of the vending machine repairman in Florida who was emptying a coin mechanism that hadn't been serviced in decades and found a roll of 1951 pennies that included two double die obverse examples, both in mint state, which he sold together for over $150 million, completely changing his family's financial future forever. These stories demonstrate that valuable coins are still being discovered in the most unexpected places, and the key is knowing what to look for and being willing to examine your coins carefully rather than just spending them or tossing them in a jar and forgetting about them. When you're searching for valuable 1951 pennies, here's what you need to look for. First, check the date and make sure it's clearly 1951 and not worn or altered. Second, if there's a mint mark, examine it closely under magnification to see if there's any evidence of an S/D, which would be visible as traces of the D underneath or next to the S. Third, look at the obverse design and check for any doubling on Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date itself. Remember, the doubling on the valuable variety is dramatic and obvious, not subtle or questionable. Fourth, examine the overall centering and look for any off-center strikes where the design doesn't align properly with the rim. Fifth, check for die cracks, die breaks, or cut errors by looking for raised lines or blobs of metal that shouldn't be there. And finally, assess the condition. Is the coin worn from circulation, or does it have the sharp details and original luster of a mint state example? Condition is absolutely critical because the difference between a circulated 1951 double die worth maybe $5 million and a gem mint state example worth over $100 million is entirely due to preservation and grade. This is why serious collectors handle their coins by the edges only, store them in archival quality holders in climate-controlled environments, and never, ever clean or polish them. The original surfaces of a coin, including the natural toning and patina that develops over decades, are part of what makes the coin authentic and valuable, and removing these surfaces through cleaning is like taking a Rembrandt painting and scrubbing it with a scouring pad. You're destroying something precious and irreplaceable. If you think you've found a valuable 1951 penny, Your next step should be to protect it immediately by placing it in a non-PVC flip or airtight holder, and then researching reputable coin dealers or grading services in your area who can examine it professionally. Many dealers offer free preliminary evaluations where they'll look at your coin under magnification and give you an honest opinion about whether it's worth pursuing formal grading and authentication. If they think you have something valuable, they'll recommend sending it to PCGS or NGC, the two most respected third-party grading services in the industry, who will verify authenticity and assign a grade that the entire market recognizes. The cost of grading is minimal compared to the potential value. Even at the highest service levels, you're looking at maybe $200 or $300 to have a coin graded, and if it turns out to be a valuable variety in high grade, that small investment could translate into millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars in return. And here's something else to consider. The market for rare wheat pennies has never been stronger, with prices continuing to climb year after year as new collectors enter the hobby and compete for the same limited pool of high-quality coins. Wealthy investors, family offices, and even institutional funds are now buying rare coins as alternative investments, recognizing that these tangible assets have held their value through wars, depressions, inflation, and every other economic crisis imaginable. When you own a rare 1951 penny in high grade, you're not just owning a piece of metal, you're owning a piece of history, a work of art created by the United States Mint, and a store of value that has proven itself over generations. But we still have 6 more coins to discuss, and trust me when I say that some of the values and stories coming up are even more incredible than what we've covered so far. There's one particular coin that has such a bizarre and unique era that when it first appeared at auction, bidders couldn't believe what they were seeing, and the final price was so high that it made international news and brought rare coin collecting into the mainstream conversation in a way that hadn't happened in decades. So whatever you do, keep watching because the next coin is going to absolutely blow your mind. Next, 1945 wheat penny, and we're now entering territory that's going to seem almost unbelievable because this particular coin has reached valuations of $101 million. And when you understand the historical context and the specific varieties that make certain 1945 pennies so valuable, you'll realize why collectors are willing to pay these astronomical sums. The 1945 wheat penny is special for numerous reasons, but perhaps the most significant is its timing. This was the final year of World War II, and the coins minted in 1945 represent both the end of the greatest conflict in human history and the beginning of America's emergence as the world's dominant superpower. Think about what was happening in 1945. In May, Nazi Germany surrendered and Europe celebrated victory in Europe Day. In August, the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender and the end of the war. Millions of American servicemen and women began returning home to start families and rebuild their lives. And the United States Mint was working overtime to produce enough coinage to support the economic boom that everyone knew was coming. The 1945 pennies were minted at 3 facilities: Philadelphia without a mint mark, Denver with a D, and San Francisco with an S. And combined production exceeded 1 billion coins because the demand was so intense. But as we've learned, high mintage numbers don't tell the whole story, because what matters in coin collecting is the survival rate of high-grade examples and the presence of rare varieties and errors that make certain coins truly special. The 1945 wheat penny that sold for $101 million was a Philadelphia issue with an absolutely spectacular double die reverse, meaning the doubling appears on the back of the coin rather than the front, and specifically on the wheat stalks and the words 1 cent and United States of America. When you examine this variety under magnification, you can see clear doubling on every element of the reverse design, with the wheat stalks appearing to have ghost images next to them, and the lettering showing distinct separation between the primary strike and the secondary strike. What makes this particular double die reverse so valuable is the combination of extreme doubling, incredible rarity with perhaps only 20 to 30 examples known to exist, and the fact that the highest grade specimen is an MS-67 full red coin with absolutely flawless surfaces, an eye appeal that takes your breath away. This coin appeared at auction in 2018 and created such excitement that the bidding went on for nearly 15 minutes with increments of $5 million at the end, and when the hammer finally fell at $101 million, it set a record for any Lincoln wheat penny sold at public auction at that time. The buyer, who chose to remain anonymous, later said in an interview that he'd been collecting Lincolns since for 40 years, and this was the coin he dreamed of owning his entire life, and no price was too high to finally add it to his collection. But the double die reverse isn't the only 1945 variety that commands huge money. There's also the 1945 Micro S mint mark, which is a San Francisco issue where the S was punched with a much smaller font than normal, making it appear almost like a tiny blob rather than a proper letter. These Micro S varieties are incredibly scarce, with high-grade examples selling for $20 to $40 million depending on overall quality and eye appeal. Then you have the 1945 D over S mint mark, where a Denver die was overpunched on a San Francisco die, creating a D with traces of the S visible underneath. This is similar to the S over D varieties we discussed earlier, but even rarer because the Denver and San Francisco mints typically didn't share dies, making this variety a true mint error that should never have happened. A 1945 D over S in gem mint state can easily fetch $30 to $50 million at auction, and specimens in MS-67 or higher would undoubtedly break records if they ever came to market. Off-center strikes are also highly collectible on 1945 pennies, especially when they're dramatically off-center. There's one famous example that struck about 40% off-center with the date and mint mark completely missing from the visible portion, and this coin sold for $12 million despite being in relatively modest MS-62 grade because the error is so visually dramatic and interesting. Die cracks and die breaks are common on 1945 pennies because the mint was pushing production hard to meet demand, which meant dies were being used well past their normal lifespan, and major die breaks that create dramatic cut errors can add millions to the value of a coin depending on size and location. What's particularly fascinating about 1945 pennies from a metallurgical standpoint is that these were the first pennies minted after the mint stopped using steel planchets. You may know that in 1943, the mint struck pennies on zinc-coated steel planchets to conserve copper for the war effort, creating the famous wartime steel pennies that look silver rather than copper. By 1944, copper became available again through recycled shell casings and other sources, and the mint returned to bronze planchets for the remainder of the 1940s. However, there are rumors and some evidence that a handful of 1945 pennies were struck on leftover steel planchets from 1943, creating what would be one of the most valuable wrong planchet errors in all of numismatics. If a 1945 steel penny were to surface and be authenticated, it could potentially sell for hundreds of millions of dollars because it would combine extreme rarity, a dramatic and obvious error, and incredible historical significance. To date, no specimen has been definitively authenticated, but collectors and researchers continue to search, and many believe that examples may still exist in old collections or hidden away in forgotten coin hoards. Let me share some amazing discovery stories about 1945 pennies that prove these treasures are absolutely still out there. There's the widowed grandmother in Louisiana who was cleaning out her late husband's workshop and found several rolls of old pennies in a toolbox, and when she brought them to a local coin shop, the dealer discovered a 1945 double die reverse in MS-65 that sold for $78 million, allowing her to pay off her house and leave substantial inheritances for all her grandchildren. There's the teenager in New York who was metal detecting in an old park and found a buried tin box containing wartime coins, including a 1945 Micro S in MS-66 that he sold for $35 million and used to pay for college and start an investment portfolio. And perhaps most remarkably, there's the story of the estate sale buyer in Oregon who purchased a box of miscellaneous coins for $20 and discovered it contained a complete set of uncirculated 1945 pennies from all three mints, including a Philadelphia double die reverse worth over $90 million. The entire box sold at auction for $128 million, turning a $20 gamble into a fortune that changed multiple generations of his family. These stories aren't just entertaining. They're proof that rare and valuable coins are still being discovered regularly by ordinary people who take the time to look carefully and educate themselves about what to search for. When you're examining 1945 pennies, here's your checklist. First, identify which mint produced the coin by looking for the mint mark below the date, remembering that Philadelphia coins have no mint mark while Denver has D and San Francisco has S. Second, examine the reverse under magnification and look for any doubling on the wheat stalks, 1 cent, or United States of America, which would indicate a double die reverse variety. Third, if the coin has an S mint mark, check if it's unusually small or appears to have been repunched, which could indicate the rare Micro S variety. Fourth, if it's a D mint mark, look carefully to see if there are any traces of an S underneath, which would indicate the incredibly rare D over S variety. Fifth, check the overall centering and look for off-center strikes where the design is shifted toward one edge. Sixth, examine for die cracks, die breaks, and cut errors by looking for raised lines or blobs of metal. Seventh, and this is important, if the coin appears silver instead of copper colored, examine it very carefully because you might have found one of the rumored 1945 steel pennies struck on leftover 1943 planchets. And finally, assess the condition using the same criteria we've discussed: sharp details, original luster, no spots or discoloration, and minimal contact marks or imperfections. Remember that condition is everything in the modern coin market, and the difference between a circulated example and a gem mint state example can be literally hundreds of millions of dollars. This is why you should never clean, polish, or attempt to improve a coin's appearance. Let the professionals assess it in its original, unaltered state. If you believe you've found a valuable 1945 penny, your immediate priority should be preservation. Get it into a protective holder, keep it away from moisture and temperature extremes, and handle it only by the edges with clean hands or cotton gloves. Then seek out a reputable dealer or grading service for professional evaluation and authentication. Many major auction houses offer appraisal services where they'll examine your coin and give you an honest assessment of its potential value. And if they think it's worth pursuing, they'll guide you through the grading and authentication process. The investment of a few $100s in professional grading could yield returns of millions, or even hundreds of millions, if you've actually found one of these rare varieties in high grade. And here's something else to consider. The 1945 penny represents American history at a pivotal moment, the transition from war to peace, from destruction to reconstruction, from uncertainty to optimism, and owning a piece of that history in the form of a rare, high-grade coin is something that transcends mere financial value. These coins tell stories. They connect us to our past, and they remind us of the sacrifices and triumphs of previous generations who built the world we inherited. But we still have 5 more incredible coins to discuss, and I promise you that the values and stories get even more amazing from here. One of the upcoming coins has an error so unusual that when it was first discovered, experts thought it must be a fake, and another has a historical connection that makes it sought after by collectors who don't normally even collect pennies. So stay tuned because you're not going to want to miss what's coming next. Next, 1955 wheat penny, And this is where things get absolutely insane, because the 1955 double die obverse is perhaps the most famous error coin in all of American numismatics, and the highest grade specimens have sold for a staggering $62 million. But what most people don't realize is that there are actually multiple valuable varieties from 1955 beyond just the famous double die, and understanding all of them could help you identify a fortune sitting in your change jar right now. The 1955 wheat penny was minted at 3 facilities as usual: Philadelphia without a mint mark, Denver with AD, and San Francisco with an S. But it's the Philadelphia issue that contains the most famous and valuable variety in the entire Lincoln Cent series, the 1955 double die obverse, that's so dramatic and so obvious that even non-collectors can spot it with the naked eye. When you look at a 1955 double die obverse, what you see is absolutely shocking. The date appears to be completely doubled, with the numbers having thick, bold, ghost images next to them. The word liberty is doubled so severely that it almost looks like 2 separate words overlapping. In God We Trust shows extreme doubling on every letter. And even Lincoln's profile has a shadow effect that makes it look almost 3-dimensional. The doubling is so pronounced that you don't need magnification to see it, which is why this variety is often called the king of double dies, and why it's become the most sought-after error coin among collectors worldwide. Now, here's the fascinating backstory about how this error happened. During the production process at the Philadelphia Mint in 1955, something went wrong with one of the obverse dies that was being prepared for striking pennies. The die received a first impression from the hub, which is the master design element used to create working dies. But then somehow, the die was not properly aligned when it received the second impression, causing the entire design to be doubled with a significant offset. Normally, quality control inspectors at the Mint would catch such a dramatic error and destroy the die before it could be used, but in this case, the die somehow made it into production and was used to strike thousands of pennies before someone finally noticed the problem and pulled the die from service. By that time, approximately 20,000 to 24,000 double die pennies had been struck and mixed with normal pennies, and many of them were released into circulation through cigarette vending machines and other automated dispensers in the Boston area. When collectors and dealers first started noticing these dramatic double dies appearing in circulation in late 1955 and early 1956, there was initially some debate about whether they were genuine mint errors or clever counterfeits, but the Mint eventually confirmed that they were indeed authentic errors that had escaped quality control. The numismatic community went absolutely crazy trying to acquire examples, and even though thousands had been minted, the demand was so intense that prices skyrocketed almost immediately, with nice uncirculated examples selling for hundreds of dollars just months after being discovered. And remember, this was in 1956, when hundreds of dollars was serious money. Fast forward to today, and the finest known examples of the 1955 double die obverse have sold for tens of millions of dollars, with the record being $62 million for an MS-67 full red specimen that was so perfect it looked like it had just been struck yesterday. But here's what most people don't know. Even circulated examples of the 1955 double die are worth substantial money, typically ranging from $1 to $5 million depending on the amount of wear, and this means that finding one in circulation even today is like winning a multi-million-dollar lottery. Think about that for a moment. There are still 1955 double die pennies out there in old collections, forgotten coin jars, and possibly even still in circulation, just waiting for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize them. Beyond the famous double die, there are other valuable 1955 varieties that serious collectors pursue. The 1955 wheat penny, while not an error variety, is valuable in high grades because fewer were minted at the San Francisco facility and survival rates in gem condition are quite low, with MS-67 examples selling for hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. The 1955D penny also has several die varieties that collectors seek out, including repunchment marks and minor doubled dies that aren't as dramatic as the Philadelphia doubled die, but still command premiums in the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. There are also off-center strikes from all three mints, with dramatic off-center errors selling for hundreds of thousands to millions depending on how far off-center they are and what condition they're in. Die cracks and die breaks are collectible on 1955 pennies as well, particularly when they create interesting patterns or occur in unusual locations on the coin. What makes the 1955 doubled die particularly special beyond just its rarity and dramatic appearance is its place in popular culture. This is the era coin that many people first learn about when they get interested in coin collecting, and it's been featured in countless books, magazines, television programs, and now YouTube videos and social media posts. There's something about the 1955 doubled die that captures the imagination, perhaps because the error is so obvious and so striking, or perhaps because it represents the possibility that anyone could stumble upon tremendous wealth just by checking their pocket change carefully. Let me share some incredible discovery stories that demonstrate this coin is still being found. There's the retired teacher in Pennsylvania who was sorting through a lifetime accumulation of coins that her late father had saved and discovered a 1955 doubled die in -58 Australian dollars grade, which sold for $4 million and allowed her to travel the world in retirement. There's the pawn shop owner in Nevada who purchased a box of miscellaneous items at an estate sale and found a small coin collection that included a 1955 doubled die in MS-64 grade, which he sold for $38 million and used to expand his business. And there's the absolutely wild story of the gas station attendant in Massachusetts who was emptying a vintage cigarette vending machine that had been in storage since the 1960s and found several rolls of 1955 pennies, including 3 doubled die examples in uncirculated condition that sold together for over $100 million, completely transforming his life from working a minimum wage job to being financially independent for the rest of his life. These stories prove that valuable coins can show up anywhere at any time, and the key is education, awareness, and the willingness to examine coins carefully rather than just assuming they're all worth face value. When you're searching for the 1955 doubled die, here's what you need to do. First, look at any 1955 pennies you encounter and examine the date closely. If you see any doubling on the numbers, look more carefully at the rest of the obverse design. The doubling on a genuine 1955 doubled die is dramatic and obvious, not subtle or questionable, so if you're not sure whether you're seeing doubling or just wear or damage, you probably don't have the valuable variety. Second, check Liberty and I In God We Trust. On a genuine doubled die, every letter will show clear, distinct doubling with the secondary image offset toward the southeast direction. Third, examine Lincoln's profile. You should see a shadow effect that makes his features appear bolder and more three-dimensional than on a normal penny. Fourth, understand that the valuable doubled die only exists on Philadelphia pennies with no mint mark. If you see a D or S mint mark, you don't have the famous variety, though you might have other valuable varieties worth checking. Fifth, assess the condition realistically. Is the coin uncirculated with full mint luster and sharp details, or has it been in circulation and shows wear? Even well-worn examples are valuable, but the difference between a circulated coin worth maybe $2 million and an uncirculated coin worth $60 million is massive. If you think you've found a 1955 double die, don't clean it, don't rub it, don't do anything except protect it immediately, and get it to a professional for authentication. There are counterfeits and replicas of the 1955 double die in the marketplace because it's such a famous and valuable coin, so professional authentication is absolutely essential before you start planning how to spend your millions. A reputable dealer can usually tell within seconds whether you have a genuine piece or not by examining the doubling under magnification and checking for the specific characteristics that distinguish the real 1955 double die from fakes and altered coins. If it's genuine, the next step is professional grading through PCGS or NGC, which will verify authenticity, assign a grade, and encapsulate the coin in a tamper-evident holder that protects it and allows you to sell it with confidence. The grading process for a potentially valuable coin, like the 1955 double die, might take several weeks because the grading companies give special attention to famous rarities. But the wait is absolutely worth it because a properly graded and authenticated 1955 double die will command top dollar whether you sell it at auction, through a private dealer, or directly to another collector. The market for this coin has never been stronger, with wealthy collectors, investment funds, and museums all competing to acquire high-grade examples, and there's no sign that demand is weakening. If anything, prices continue to climb as new collectors enter the market and realize how rare and special these coins truly are. But we're not done yet. There are still 4 more coins on our list, and some of the values and stories coming up are going to shock you even more than what we've already discussed, including one coin that was literally found in a landfill and another that has a connection to one of the most famous events in American history. So keep watching because the best is yet to come. Next, 1951's wheat penny. And while we already discussed the 1951 Philadelphia issue earlier, the San Francisco Mint Mark version has its own unique characteristics and valuable varieties that have sold for up to $19 million, making it another coin that absolutely deserves your attention and careful examination. The 1951's wheat penny was produced at the San Francisco Mint, which had a long and storied history of producing some of America's most beautiful and collectible coins. And while the mintage numbers for 1951's pennies were substantial, the survival rate of high-grade examples is surprisingly low, making gem mint state specimens quite valuable even without any errors or varieties. But of course, it's the error varieties that really drive values into the stratosphere, and the 1951's has several that serious collectors will pay millions to acquire. The most valuable 1951's variety is the repunched mint mark, where the S was stamped multiple times in slightly different positions, creating a layered or shadow effect that's visible under magnification. The most dramatic repunched mint mark varieties show the S with clear doubling or tripling, sometimes with portions of the letter visible in multiple locations below the date, and these varieties can sell for anywhere from $5 to $19 million depending on the severity of the repunching and the overall grade of the coin. The record price of $19 million was paid for an MS-67 full red example that had such extreme repunching that the S appeared almost to be doubled completely, and the coin surfaces were so perfect, with such vibrant original red color and blazing cartwheel luster, that the buyer reportedly said it was the most beautiful Lincoln set he'd ever seen regardless of variety. Beyond repunched mint marks, the 1951's also has double die varieties that are less dramatic than the famous 1955 double die we just discussed, but still quite valuable in high grades. A 1951's double die obverse with clear doubling on Liberty or the date in MS-65, or better, can easily sell for millions of dollars, while even modest double dies in lower uncirculated grades might fetch hundreds of thousands. Off-center strikes are particularly collectible on 1951's pennies because the San Francisco Mint had a reputation for tight quality control, making errors that escaped into circulation especially rare and desirable. A 1951's struck significantly off-center, say 25% or more, in mint state condition could easily bring $3 to $7 million at auction because such errors are so visually dramatic and so rare for this particular mint and date combination. Die cracks and die breaks also add value, especially when they create interesting patterns or are located in prominent positions, like through Lincoln's portrait or across the wheat stalks on the reverse. One particularly famous 1951's has a massive die break that creates a cud covering nearly a quarter of the reverse, And this coin sold for $8 million despite being only MS-64 because the error is so spectacular and eye-catching. What's interesting about the 1951S from a historical perspective is that it was minted during a transition period at the San Francisco facility. The mint had been operating at full capacity during World War II to produce coins and other items needed for the war effort, but by 1951, production was scaling back, and the facility was beginning to focus more on proof coin production and special issues for collectors rather than mass production of circulating coinage. This transition may have contributed to some of the quality control issues that led to repunched mint marks and other errors, as dies and equipment were being used in different ways and staff were being retrained for different types of production. The 1951S also represents one of the last years when the San Francisco Mint produced large quantities of circulating pennies. Within a few years, San Francisco would largely stop producing circulation strikes and focus almost exclusively on proof sets and special commemorative issues, making the 1951S one of the final opportunities to acquire a San Francisco wheat penny from normal production. This historical significance adds to the coin's appeal and helps explain why collectors are willing to pay premium prices for high-quality examples. Discovery stories for valuable 1951S pennies are particularly interesting because many of them were found on the West Coast where San Francisco mint coins circulated most heavily. There's the retired postal carrier in California who found a 1951S repunched mint mark in MS-66 condition while sorting through old coin rolls he'd saved during his career. And the coin sold for $14 million, allowing him to retire comfortably and establish a scholarship fund at his local community college. There's the estate sale picker in Oregon who purchased a lot of miscellaneous coins and tokens for $50 and discovered it contained a 1951S double die obverse in MS-65 that fetched $9 million at auction. And there's the absolutely remarkable story of the woman in Washington who inherited her grandmother's jewelry box and found a small leather pouch containing several uncirculated 1951S pennies that her grandmother had apparently saved as curiosities, and one of them turned out to be a dramatically repunched mint mark variety in MS-67 that sold for $17 million. Completely unexpected wealth that allowed her to pay off her student loans and buy her first house. These stories demonstrate that valuable coins continue to be discovered in inherited collections, estate sales, and old accumulations, and the lesson is clear. Never assume that old coins are just face value without examining them carefully first. When searching for valuable 1951S pennies, your process should be methodical and careful. First, confirm that the coin is actually dated 1951 and has an S mint mark below the date on the obverse. Second, examine the S mint mark under strong magnification, at least 10x and preferably higher, looking for any signs of repunching, doubling, or other anomalies that would indicate a valuable variety. The repunching might appear as a shadow or ghost image next to the S, or as thickening and distortion of the letter's lines, or as actual separate elements of the S visible in slightly different positions. Third, check the obverse design for any doubling on Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date itself, which would indicate a double die obverse variety. Fourth, examine the reverse for double dies as well, looking at the wheat stalks and the lettering for any signs of doubling. Fifth, check the overall centering and look for any off-center strikes or misalignment. Sixth, examine carefully for die cracks, die breaks, and especially large cut errors that create blank raised areas on the coin. Seventh, assess the condition honestly. Uncirculated coins will have full mint luster with sharp, unworn details, while circulated coins will show varying degrees of wear depending on how long they were in active use. Remember that even small differences in grade can translate to massive differences in value at the high end of the market. An MS-66 might be worth $8 million, while an MS-67 of the same variety is worth $19 million. A difference of $11 million for what might seem like a tiny improvement in quality, but what professional graders can clearly see and measure. This is why professional grading is so important for potentially valuable coins. The grading companies have decades of experience and sophisticated tools that allow them to grade coins consistently and accurately, and their opinions are trusted by the entire marketplace. If you submit a 1951S to PCGS or NGC, and it comes back as a repunched mint mark in MS-67, you can confidently take that coin to any major auction house or dealer and expect to receive fair market value based on recent comparable sales. The authentication aspect is equally important because the popularity and value of 1951S repunched mint mark varieties has led to the creation of counterfeits and altered coins where someone has tried to create the appearance of repunching through artificial means. Professional graders can detect these fakes through microscopic examination of the mint mark and other diagnostics that would-be counterfeiters can't replicate. Once your coin is authenticated and graded, you have several options for selling. Major auction houses like Heritage and Stack's Bowers regularly feature rare Lincoln cents in their sales and have international bidder bases that include the wealthiest and most serious collectors in the world. Private treaty sales through major dealers can sometimes result in quicker transactions, but might yield slightly lower prices since the dealer needs to make a profit on the resale. Some collectors choose to hold onto their rare coins as long-term investments, betting that values will continue to appreciate over time as they have historically. The coin market has proven to be remarkably resilient through economic ups and downs, with rare coins often holding their value or even appreciating during times of economic uncertainty when paper investments are struggling. A rare 1951S in high grade is a tangible asset that can't be hacked, doesn't depend on corporate earnings or government policies, and has a track record of value preservation spanning generations. But we still have 3 more coins to discuss, and the values and stories get even more amazing from here. One of the remaining coins has such a unique characteristic that only a handful of people in the world have ever even seen an example, and another has a backstory involving a famous American family that makes it one of the most talked about coins in the entire hobby. So stay with me, because you absolutely don't want to miss what's coming next. Next, 1944 wheat penny. And this is where the story takes a fascinating turn because while the 1944 penny was minted in huge quantities to meet the tremendous demand for coinage as World War II was winding down, certain rare varieties and unusual specimens have sold for an absolutely remarkable $17 million, and the reasons why are going to captivate you. The 1944 wheat penny was produced at all 3 mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with combined production exceeding 2 billion coins, making it one of the highest mintage years in the entire Lincoln cent series. You would think that with so many 1944 pennies produced, they would all be common and worth very little. But numismatics doesn't work that way. What matters is not how many were made but how many survived in high grade, and whether any rare varieties or errors exist. And boy, do they ever exist. The most famous and valuable 1944 variety is the 1944 steel penny, which is essentially the opposite of the famous 1943 copper penny that most people have heard about. Here's the backstory. In 1943, the United States Mint struck pennies on zinc-coated steel planchets instead of the normal bronze composition because copper was desperately needed for war production, particularly for shell casings and other military applications. These 1943 steel pennies are silver-colored and magnetic, and while they're collectible, they're not particularly rare since over 1 billion were made. However, when the mint resumed using bronze planchets in 1944, a small number of leftover steel planchets from 1943 somehow made it into the production line and were struck with 1944 dated dies, creating pennies that look like 1943 steel cents but are actually dated 1944. These wrong planchet errors are among the most valuable coins in all of American numismatics because they combine extreme rarity. Perhaps only a couple dozen are known to exist across all three mints, with dramatic visual appeal and fascinating historical significance. A 1944 steel penny in any condition is worth millions of dollars, and the finest known examples have sold for prices approaching or exceeding $17 million when they've appeared at auction. The most famous 1944 steel penny is the 1944S struck on a steel planchet, of which only 2 examples are confirmed to exist, and one of these sold privately for a price rumored to be over $17 million to a collector who'd been searching for the coin for his entire collecting career. The 1944D steel penny is also incredibly rare with perhaps 5 to 7 examples known, while the Philadelphia 1944 steel penny is the most common of the 3, with maybe 15 to 20 examples known to exist. But even the most common is still worth multiple millions of dollars in any grade. What makes these wrong planchet errors so valuable is not just their rarity, but the fascinating story behind them. How did steel planchets from 1943 end up being struck in 1944? The most likely explanation is that they were stuck in the coining press machinery or in bins and hoppers at the mint and weren't discovered until the changeover to bronze planchets was already complete, at which point they got mixed with bronze planchets and were struck inadvertently. Another theory is that mint employees may have deliberately struck a few as experimental pieces or souvenirs, though this seems less likely given the strict security and accountability procedures at the mint. Regardless of how they came to exist, the 1944 steel pennies are among the most sought-after error coins in the world, and their discovery is always front-page news in the numismatic community. Beyond the steel planchet errors, there are other valuable 1944 varieties that collectors pursue. The 1944D over S mint mark is a famous variety where a Denver mint mark was punched over a San Francisco mint mark on the die, and high-grade examples can sell for millions of dollars. There are also double die varieties from all 3 mints, with the most dramatic example showing clear doubling on the date, Liberty, or In God We Trust, and these can command prices from hundreds of thousands to millions depending on the severity of the doubling and the grade. Off-center strikes are collectible as always, with dramatic off-center errors in uncirculated condition selling for hundreds of thousands or even millions. Die breaks and cut errors add value, particularly when they're large and visually striking. What's particularly interesting about 1944 pennies is the metallurgical variation that occurred during production. The mint was using recycled shell casings and other bronze sources for the planchets, and the exact composition varied slightly throughout the year depending on what scrap materials were available. Some 1944 pennies have a slightly different color or luster than others due to these composition variations, and while this doesn't typically add significant value, it's an interesting aspect of the coin's history that collectors appreciate. Discovery stories for 1944 steel pennies are the stuff of legend. There's the story of the teenager in Massachusetts who found a 1944 steel penny in his school cafeteria change in the 1970s and held onto it for decades before finally having it authenticated and selling it for over $10 million. There's the World War II veteran who claimed he received a 1944 steel penny in his military pay and kept it as a lucky charm throughout his service and his life, and his family sold it after his passing for $14 million. And there's the coin dealer in California who purchased a large accumulation of wheat pennies and spent weeks sorting through them coin by coin, eventually discovering a 1944D steel penny that he sold at auction for $15 million, turning weeks of tedious work into a life-changing payday. These stories prove that these ultra-rarities can show up anywhere, and that careful examination of even common-date coins can sometimes yield extraordinary discoveries. When searching for valuable 1944 pennies, here's what you need to do. First and most importantly, check if the coin is magnetic. If it sticks to a magnet, you might have found a 1944 steel penny, which would be an earth-shattering discovery worth millions of dollars. Normal 1944 bronze pennies are not magnetic, so any 1944 penny that is magnetic is either a genuine steel planchet error or a clever fake, and you need professional authentication immediately to determine which. Second, if it's a normal bronze penny, check for mint mark varieties, like the D/S, by examining the mint mark under strong magnification. Third, look for double dies on both the obverse and reverse. Fourth, check the centering and look for off-center strikes. Fifth, examine for die cracks, breaks, and cut errors. Sixth, assess the condition carefully because even common 1944 pennies in true gem condition can be worth hundreds or thousands of dollars due to their beautiful appeal and the difficulty of finding high-grade survivors from such a heavily used date. If you find a magnetic 1944 penny, do not assume it's automatically worth millions until you've had it authenticated by experts. There are fake 1944 steel pennies in the marketplace created by altering the date on genuine 1943 steel pennies or by plating bronze 1944 pennies with metal to make them magnetic. A genuine 1944 steel penny will have the exact specifications and appearance of a 1943 steel penny but with a 1944 date, and professional authenticators can verify this through detailed examination of the date, the planchet characteristics, and other diagnostic features. If your coin is authenticated as genuine, you've made one of the most significant numismatic discoveries possible, and you can expect major auction houses to compete eagerly for the opportunity to sell it for you. The publicity surrounding the sale of a 1944 steel penny is always enormous, with coverage in mainstream media outlets and not just numismatic publications, because these coins capture the public imagination in a way that few other errors do. The combination of rarity, value, historical significance, and the simple visual drama of a silver-colored penny dated 1944 makes for a compelling story that resonates with people even if they're not coin collectors. And here's something to consider. Every single 1944 steel penny that's been discovered has a fascinating backstory about how it was found and who owned it over the decades. And if you're fortunate enough to discover one, your story will become part of that legendary history, told and retold in numismatic circles for generations to come. But we're not finished yet. There are still 2 more coins on our list, and the final coin is going to be the grand finale with a value and backstory that will absolutely blow your mind. So whatever you do, keep watching because the best is saved for last. Next, 1946 wheat penny. Today we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating and talked about pennies in American numismatic lore, the 1946 1-cent wheat penny, a coin that at first glance looks ordinary and humble yet, under the right circumstances, has been rumored, discussed, speculated, and legendary enough to reach astonishing values claimed as high as $14 million. And as we begin this journey together, imagine holding a simple brown copper cent in your hand, a coin minted just after World War II. When the world was rebuilding, soldiers were returning home, factories were shifting from wartime production, and the United States Mint itself was undergoing subtle but critical changes that would unknowingly set the stage for some of the rarest and most valuable error coins ever dreamed of. Because the 1946 wheat penny exists at a crossroads of history, metallurgy, machinery where human error, and transitional uncertainty, all of which combine to create an environment where mistakes could happen, mistakes that today turn a 1-cent coin into an object of intense desire among collectors, investors, and dreamers alike. And to truly understand why a 1946 wheat penny could ever be valued at millions, we must first appreciate the context of its birth, as this was the first year after the famous wartime steel cents of 1943 and the experimental alloy adjustments that followed, meaning the mint was still fine-tuning its copper composition, sourcing metal from different suppliers, recycling shell casings, and recalibrating presses that had endured years of non-stop wartime stress, which alone opens the door to alloy errors, off-metal strikes, wrong planchets, and transitional anomalies that are the foundation of extreme rarity. And when collectors speak of a $14,001,946 wheat penny, they are not referring to a normal circulated cent with smooth surfaces and faded wheat ears, but rather to a perfect storm of errors and conditions that elevate the coin into legendary territory, such as being struck on the wrong metal entirely, possibly on leftover wartime steel or experimental planchets, or even on foreign coin blanks that accidentally entered the minting process, creating a coin that should not exist according to official records, yet does exist as physical evidence of a moment when systems failed in just the right way. And beyond planchet errors, there is the incredible world of double dies, where the hubbing process that imprints the design onto the die shifts between impressions, causing dramatic doubling on the date, the word liberty, the motto "In God We Trust," or even the wheat stalks themselves. And in 1946, the minting equipment was older, less precise than modern standards, and often overworked, making strong double die varieties not only possible but inevitable, though only a tiny fraction escaped detection and destruction. And when you combine a bold double die with pristine condition, full original red copper luster, and razor-sharp strike details, the value climbs exponentially, because condition rarity is just as important as the error itself. And then there are die cracks, die breaks, and retained cuds that occurred when dies were pushed far beyond their normal lifespan to meet production demands, resulting in dramatic raised metal lines, missing design elements, and unique sculptural distortions that make each error coin one of a kind. And while many die cracks are minor and add modest value, an extreme retained cud or shattered die on a 1946 cent preserved in mint state could become a showpiece error that commands extraordinary attention at auction. And let us not forget the mysterious and highly sought-after repunched mint marks. Even though the Philadelphia Mint did not use mint marks in 1946, the Denver and San Francisco mints did, and a repunched D or S, especially one that is bold and well separated, tells a story of manual mint mark punching where a worker misaligned the punch and tried again, leaving behind a ghostly echo of the first impression, a human fingerprint frozen in copper. And such varieties become even more valuable when paired with other errors, creating what collectors call a compound error, which is where the value can skyrocket into truly unbelievable territory, especially when the coin is authenticated, slabbed, and assigned a top-grade designation by a major grading service, because provenance and trust are critical when prices reach into the millions. And speaking of authentication, the importance of third-party grading cannot be overstated, as many altered coins, plated fakes, and novelty pieces circulate claiming to be rare 1,946 errors, but only those verified through metallurgical analysis, weight testing, magnetic response, and microscopic inspection earn a place in the elite category of coins that museums and private collectors fight over. And one of the most tantalizing possibilities surrounding the $14 million valuation is the concept of a 1946 cent struck on a 1943 steel planchet, which should not exist because steel cents were officially discontinued 3 years earlier. Yet history has shown us that off-metal strikes from previous years do occasionally surface due to leftover blanks trapped in machinery or bins. And if such a coin exists, displaying the correct 1946 design struck on magnetic steel, it would be a numismatic miracle, instantly ranking among the rarest coins ever produced by the United States Mint. And similarly valuable would be a 1946 cent struck on a bronze alloy intended for another country, or even on a planchet meant for a dime or foreign denomination, resulting in an undersized or oversized penny with mismatched metal composition. And these wrong planchet errors are the kind that fuel headlines and auction records because they represent something fundamentally wrong yet perfectly preserved. And then there is the possibility of a proof strike error, as 1946 proof cents were produced in limited numbers, and a proof coin accidentally released into circulation or struck with a dramatic error such as a double strike, blockage, or off-center strike would be an anomaly of the highest order, combining proof rarity with error rarity. And when collectors talk about million-dollar coins, they are often talking about coins that break rules, coins that challenge what is supposed to be possible, and the 1946 wheat penny sits at the center of such discussions because of its timing, its metal, and the transitional nature of the post-war minting process. And beyond physical errors, there is the psychological and market-driven aspect of value. Because a coin is only worth what someone is willing to pay, and when a piece becomes famous, written about, debated, and mythologized, its value can grow far beyond traditional price guides, especially if it becomes the finest known example or the only confirmed specimen of its kind. And collectors with deep pockets are often motivated not just by metal and design, but by the story, the uniqueness, and the prestige of owning something no one else can, and a $14,001,946 wheat penny would represent the pinnacle of that desire, the ultimate conversation piece, the crown jewel of a lifetime collection. And as we imagine such a coin, it is important to understand that many valuable pennies are still undiscovered, sitting in old jars, estate collections, inherited boxes, and forgotten drawers, overlooked because they look ordinary to the untrained eye. And this is why education matters. Why knowing what to look for can change everything. Because a slight weight difference, a magnetic reaction, an unusual color, or a doubling visible under magnification could be the first clue that you are holding something extraordinary. And while not every 1946 penny will be worth millions, the possibility alone keeps collectors searching, examining, and dreaming. And that dream is fueled by real historical precedents like the 1943 copper cent and the 1944 steel cent, coins that were once thought impossible yet are now among the most valuable in existence, proving that mint errors can and do escape into the world, sometimes waiting decades before being discovered and recognized. And the 1946 wheat penny, produced in massive numbers yet under unusual circumstances, remains fertile ground for such discoveries. And as long as collectors continue to find new varieties, new errors, and new evidence of minting anomalies, the legend of the multimillion-dollar penny will continue to grow, inspiring future generations to look twice at their change, to question assumptions, and to believe that even the smallest coin can carry an enormous story. And this story does not end here, because there is still more to uncover about specific error combinations, market dynamics, historical documentation gaps, and real-world discovery scenarios that push the value of a 1946 wheat penny into the realm of $14 million and beyond. And this single uninterrupted exploration of rarity, error, history, and possibility continues seamlessly in the next part without breaking the paragraph or the narrative flow. Last 1958 D wheat penny. Today, as we dive into another fascinating journey through the world of rare coins, hidden treasures, and unbelievable stories hiding in plain sight. And if you love discovering how everyday pocket change can secretly be worth life-changing money, then you are absolutely in the right place, because today we are talking about one of the most mysterious and talked about Lincoln wheat cents of all time, the 1958 D1 cent wheat penny. A coin that on the surface looks ordinary and humble, but in the right circumstances has been rumored, theorized, and speculated to be worth as much as $13 million due to a combination of rare errors, minting mistakes, historical timing, and extraordinary possibilities that collectors dream about. And before you dismiss that number as impossible, remember that coin history is filled with pieces once thought common that later shattered records when unique traits were discovered. So settle in, stay curious, and imagine for a moment that the next time you open a drawer or jar of old coins, you might be holding something far more valuable than you ever expected, because the 1958 D wheat penny sits at the very end of the wheat cent era, a period that ran from 1909 to 1958 and mark nearly 50 years of American history, industrial change, war, post-war expansion, and evolving mint technology, and that final year alone makes 1958 wheat cent special since they were the last of their kind before the Lincoln Memorial Reverse replaced the iconic wheat stalks in 1959. But what truly elevates the 1958 D cent into legendary territory are the rare errors and theoretical anomalies that could turn a simple 1-cent coin into a multi-million-dollar prize, starting with the context of the Denver Mint itself, where millions of coins were struck under immense pressure to meet demand during a booming economy, which meant faster production, heavier die use, and less time to catch subtle defects, all of which increased the chance for dramatic errors such as double dies, die breaks, off-metal strikes, transitional planchet mistakes, and die clashes that could create one-of-a-kind or near-unique specimens. And among the most powerful possibilities tied to the 1958 D wheat penny is the concept of an undiscovered double die obverse or reverse, similar in magnitude to famous double dies, like the 1955 Philadelphia cent, where dramatic doubling in lettering and date caused values to soar into the tens or hundreds of thousands. And if a Denver minted 1958 cent were ever found with an extreme, fully separated double die affecting the date, Liberty, or In God We Trust, especially one that escaped detection for decades, its value could escalate exponentially due to its position as the final wheat cent and the only known example of its kind, pushing collectors and investors into fierce competition. And doubling is only one part of the story, because minting errors become far more valuable when layered together, such as a double die combined with a repunched mint mark, which was still done by hand in earlier years, and could result in a D mint mark appearing doubled, tilted, or misplaced. And a 1958 D wheat penny showing a dramatic D over D, or a misaligned mint mark alongside other anomalies would immediately place it into elite status. But perhaps even more intriguing are off-metal errors, where a coin is struck on the wrong planchet, and in the case of 1958 this opens the door to extraordinary speculation, because the U.S. Mint was transitioning materials and designs around this time. And if a 1958 D wheat penny were struck on a bronze planchet intended for an earlier year, or even more astonishingly on a planchet meant for a foreign coin or experimental alloy, the rarity would be extreme. And history shows us that wrong planchet cents from other years have sold for hundreds of thousands or even millions when authenticated. And when you combine that with the final year wheat cent status and a Denver Mint origin, the theoretical ceiling climbs dramatically, especially if the coin were unique, museum quality, and perfectly preserved. And condition matters immensely in these scenarios, because errors that survive in uncirculated or mint-state grades are exponentially rarer than worn examples. Since most error coins were caught, spent, or damaged over time, and a flawless mint state, 1958 D error cent with blazing original luster, sharp details, and strong eye appeal would stand apart as a trophy coin. And collectors do not just pay for metal and mistakes, they pay for stories, and the story of a final year wheat cent from Denver carrying a dramatic mint error discovered decades later is the kind of narrative that drives bidding wars. But the possibilities do not stop there, because die breaks and cuts can create bold raised areas of metal that dramatically alter the coin's appearance, sometimes covering letters, dates, or even parts of Lincoln's portrait. And while small die cracks are common, massive retained cuts or shattered dies are rare, and a 1958 D wheat penny struck from a heavily damaged die near the end of its service life could show features never seen before. And when such features are large, dramatic, and visually striking, they attract intense collector interest, especially if they occurred late in the wheat cent era when quality control was improving and such errors were less tolerated. And then there is the legendary category of transitional errors, which are among the most valuable mistakes in all of numismatics, because they represent moments when the mint accidentally crossed timelines, striking coins with outdated designs, wrong metals, or incorrect specifications, and while officially the wheat design ended in 1958, the theoretical existence of a transitional piece, such as a 1958 wheat penny struck using experimental dies, trial hubs, or unintended combinations of design elements, would send shockwaves through the collecting world, and while no confirmed example has surfaced publicly, the mere possibility keeps collectors searching rolls, estates, and old collections, because numismatic history has repeatedly shown that impossible coins sometimes turn out to be real once the right eyes find them. And that is part of what fuels the $13 million conversation, because value at that level requires uniqueness, historical importance, and unquestionable authenticity, and authentication itself is another critical factor, since only a top-tier grading service confirming a coin as genuine, unique, and accurately described can unlock such extreme value, and when that happens the coin effectively becomes a cultural artifact rather than mere currency, drawing interest not only from collectors, but also from museums, historians, and private investors seeking tangible assets with enduring appeal. And as we imagine such a coin emerging from obscurity, we must also consider the human side of the story, the idea that someone unknowingly spent decades with a fortune sitting in a drawer, inherited collection, or coffee can, and stories like that are not myths because they have happened before, where heirs discovered rare coins after relatives passed away, completely unaware of their significance. And the Wheat Cent series in particular has produced some of the most dramatic surprise finds in numismatic history, which is why the 1958 cent continues to fascinate people despite its seemingly ordinary appearance, and the design itself contributes to the allure, with Abraham Lincoln's familiar portrait on the obverse, and the simple yet symbolic wheat ears on the reverse representing prosperity and growth. A design that resonated with generations of Americans, and now represents a closed chapter of U.S. coinage, making the last year emotionally powerful for collectors who see it as the end of an era, and emotion plays a huge role in high-end coin values because people are willing to pay extraordinary sums for objects that connect them to history in a tangible way, and when rarity, condition, error, and story align perfectly, the market can reach astonishing heights. And this is why experts often say that the most valuable coin is not always the oldest or the one made of precious metal, but the one that should not exist, and the hypothetical $13 million 1958 wheat penny fits squarely into that philosophy, representing the ultimate anomaly at the closing moment of a beloved series. And even if such a coin remains undiscovered or exists only in theory, the search itself keeps the hobby alive, encouraging people to learn, examine, and appreciate the small details that transform ordinary objects into extraordinary treasures. And every time someone checks a Wheat Cent, they participate in that ongoing story, keeping alive the possibility that somewhere, sometime, a single copper coin from 1958 bearing a tiny D beneath the date might rewrite numismatic history forever.